standing by.
Well, the mics are now muted, so we'll pick that up.
How can I respond? Gold leader
I'll-
standing by.
I don't know. It wouldn't.
Lock S foils into attack
Yeah, lock
positions.
S foils into attack position. S
You're
foil.
live now. Just wanna say.
Now I'm live.
Yeah, you people can see you.
Oh, they can even see me too. We're normally much more together than this, but tonight we seem to be a little less formal. Hi, welcome back to Wednesday Night Bible Study. As always, I have Thomas directing
Yo.
and Cindy answering the Facebook questions, and Daniel hanging out, providing studio audience for all of this, which is nice. But we are continuing our study in the prophets. We're should be streaming in a lot of locations tonight, actually. Our YouTube location, our Vimeo location, and we're experimenting where we're on two different Facebook pages, my personal Facebook page and the church Facebook page. So we're all over the place with this Bible study. So apparently pulling out all the stops for the prophet Haggai. Apparently that's one that's really going to draw them in, I guess. And so that's what I'm thinking on that. But as you can tell, we're entering that section of the prophets that are the more obscure that you'd be surprised if your pastor preached on. And you wonder some how they even got into the biblical text. And Haggai is an unusual prophet in his own right, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But he has some redeeming qualities, so I want to make sure and celebrate him a little bit. We've just got a few more prophets, and then we'll see where we go from there. I'm actually toying with the notion of New Testament. So absolutely may move on to the other testament. Cindy is here moderating the questions, and so hopefully if you have questions, you can type them in the comments. She will see them, and we will hope that I will remember to repeat the questions because she has steadfastly refused to have a live mic near her during this Bible study. I don't really know what that is, but maybe that goes on the prayer requests. I don't know. Couldn't say, really. So anyway, let us then turn our attention to the prophet Haggai. There are some things about Haggai we don't know a lot about, and some things about Haggai we know a lot about. So he is one of the two prophets of the rebuilding. Haggai and Zechariah are our two prophets of the rebuilding. And this would be a good time to tell you why I remember that so precisely. When I was in undergraduate, Dr. Browning was my Old Testament teacher. And if you're watching Dan, I'm doing the best I can. Dan said that if we would he's going to ask a question on the test, who are the two prophets of the rebuilding? And if we said Ezra and Nehemiah, he would put two giant red X's on our test and would be very tempted to not pass us. Well, I missed that day. And on the test, the two prophets of the post-exile came up, the two prophets of the rebuilding came up, and I put Ezra and Nehemiah. And true to his word, Dan had 2 3-inch red marks on my test. Though he didn't fail the whole test, he was obviously very upset about that. And as a result, to this day, I have not forgotten that the two prophets of the rebuilding are Haggai and Zechariah, and Ezra and Nehemiah, neither were prophets. Neither of them were prophets at all. So we will not be covering them in this time because they're not prophets, and so they don't go in our prophet study. So Haggai, obviously, don't have time to unpack all of that, but I will never forget Haggai as a prophet of the rebuilding. But let's start with what we don't know about him. He might be one of the exiles who's returned from Babylon, who was encouraged by Ezekiel's visions. He might also be a Jerusalem priest motivated by the temple and the priesthood in Jerusalem. So we don't know whether he is a local who has been left behind and is now in the Holy Land, or if he's one of those returning exiles. And there are some suggestions he could be old. And the only real suggestion for that comes at the beginning of chapter 2, when he comments on who remembers what this temple was like. It's not anywhere close to how great it was, implying that maybe he might have seen how great it was, and therefore maybe a very old prophet at this time, or maybe he just heard how great it was. I don't know. And also, he does have quite a bit of knowledge about what makes clean and unclean sacrifices. And so that might imply he was some priestly lineage. We don't know for sure. So we're really a lot of maybes on this page, as you can see, because we don't know a whole lot about Haggai. So I will take a drink, which will give us time to ask questions if there might be questions for me to repeat. If I keep telling myself that, I might remember it.
That's true.
Well, the one thing I can tell you about when Haggai writes, Haggai gives us dates. He gives us good dates. So he starts preaching mid-August 520 BCE. We know that so precisely because it's the second year of King Darius on the first day of the 6th month. So he actually gives us that. There are 3 different dates given in this book that all span about a 5-month period. The first chapter comes from mid-August. The early part of the second chapter comes from early October, and the last part of the chapter comes in December of chapter 2. So how about that? I can't normally give you anything, but this is the date that Haggai says he's writing. Is he really writing at this time? Probably. I mean, it fits here better than just about anything. I mean, the setting of the book and everything else seems to imply, yeah, this is actually the right time to look at it. So late 6th century. Remember that officially the exile ends when Cyrus the Great allows people to return home. The Edict of Cyrus, 529. So we're talking about 9 years after it would be okay to return back to the Holy Land. The oracles are directed at the governor, Zerubbabel, the second best name in the Old Testament, with the best name in the Old Testament going to Maher-shalal-Hashbaz. Second best name, Zerubbabel. It's a really good name. And though I've told the story before, it's worth telling again. I did have a former colleague I taught at University of Mary Hardin-Baylor who wanted to have a son so he could name him Zerubbabel and call him Bubba. God blessed him with 4 daughters because God is a just and merciful God. And that is why that happened. Anyway, Zerubbabel is the governor. We don't have a king right now, so that's the leadership. He's working for Persia. And Joshua, sometimes spelled Jeshua, same guy, who is working as the high priest. So we got a lot of Joshuas at this point, and you don't want to confuse them. This is not Joshua entering the Holy Land, book of Joshua. This is Joshua who was acting as high priest at this time. So that's who they're directed towards. So how are we doing? You guys all okay? We're all right. Yeah. Hanging on every word? Yeah. I can tell. It's just like teaching again. Let's look at the beginning of chapter 1. In the second year of King Darius, in the 6th month, on the first day of the month, the word of the Lord came by the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest. So, just exactly what I said. Thus says the Lord of hosts, these people say the time has not yet come to rebuild the Lord's house. Then the word of the Lord came by the prophet Haggai, saying, is it a time for you yourselves to live in your paneled houses while this house lies in ruins? Now, therefore, thus says the Lord of hosts, consider how you have fared. You have sown much and harvested little. You eat, but you never have enough. You drink, but you never have your fill. You clothe yourselves, but no one is warm. And you that earn wages to put them in a bag with holes. So it's really kind of a neat way he introduces this, because he uses a prophetic introduction to say what the people are saying is wrong. So thus says the Lord, these people say the time hasn't come to do this. Then the word of the Lord came to me and said, oh, really? The time's not come to do this? Well, is it time for you? And so you have a question, right? No.
Tyler Stegall says, I'm Haggai in a good time. It just made me laugh.
I see. Thank you, Tyler. We'll get back to the text. So we have the irony here of introducing the prophetic speech with what the people are saying, which is wrong. And then the actual prophetic word that says, is it time for yourself to live in your luxurious houses? So this is not saying that the people have come back and God expects the temple to be built before they have shelter. This is saying that the Zerubbabels of the world and the Jeshuas of the world and the upper class of the world are taking the time to build luxury estates, luxury houses, if you will, while God's house is not being a priority. And their argument is, well, just as soon as we have some extra, we absolutely will make God a priority. And Haggai is pointing out that look how it's going here. You know, you have sown a lot and harvested little. So you're acting as though, you know, you're putting your money into a bag with holes in it. You're never going to have extra. Unless God is a priority, you're never going to be where you need to be. And so it is absolutely hitting them right where they're trying to put God off. Well, as soon as we have some extra, As soon as we have a little, we'll take care of that. And God's point is no. If God's not a priority, you're never going to have extra. That's not the way this works. So that's where he opens. So we good? Cool. I have to wait for the 10-second delay to see if I have questions. Then, thus says the Lord of hosts, consider how you fared. Go up to the hills, bring wood, build the house, so that I may take pleasure in it and be honored, says the Lord. You've looked for much, and lo, it came to little. And when you brought it home, I blew it away. Why, says the Lord of hosts? Because my house lies in ruins, while all of you hurry off to your own houses. Therefore the heavens above you will have withheld, therefore the heavens above you have withheld the dew, the earth has withheld its produce, and I have called for a drought on the lands and hills, on the grain, the new wine, the oil, on what the soil produces, on human beings and animals, and all their labors. So God's, again, you haven't made me a priority. Make me a priority. Go to the hills, bring down the wood, build this house. Don't go off to your own houses, because if you don't, it's not going to go well. God is always about wanting to be the priority in the lives of the people, not the afterthought. This is the difference between Cain and Abel's sacrifice. Abel brings the first fruits, Cain brings some of the fruits of the ground. You're not allowed to just throw God a bone. You make God a priority, and otherwise you're never going to have God as a priority. I mean, it's just never going to work out that way. So then we get another word. Then Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel. This is, by the way, the biggest plot twist of any prophetic book. And this is why I said Haggai had some unique things to offer. This is probably the greatest unique thing. And I preached on Haggai not long ago, and I brought this up. This is one of the most unique prophetic books. You never see this anywhere. God called the prophet. The prophet spoke to the leadership, gave the warnings, and then, verse 12, then Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and Joshua, son of Jehozadak, and the high priest with all the remnant of the people obeyed the voice of the Lord their God in the words of the prophet Haggai. Who in the world could have seen that coming? No one could ever have anticipated people actually doing what God said. I mean, this never happens. It never happens, but they did. Haggai said, hey, make me a priority. And the people says, doggone it, we really should. That was on us, our bad. And they actually do make God a priority in the building. I mean, I don't even know what to say. This never happens, ever.
Good on them.
Yeah, right. Yes, good for them. Because
What's the rest of the book about?
God cheers them on.
Okay.
He really does. She asked what the rest of the book was about. The rest of the book is God going, yeah, you don't get discouraged. They obeyed the voice of the Lord their God and the words of the prophet, as the Lord their God had sent him, and the people feared the Lord. Then Haggai, the messenger of the Lord, spoke to the people with the Lord's message, saying, I am with you, says the Lord. And the Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and the spirit of Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the spirit of all the remnant of the people. And they came and worked on the house of the Lord their God. I mean, good for them. I mean, who would see this? No drama in this, right? You would think this makes a pretty bad story, because there's literally no drama in this at all. So verse 15, so that was in August. Now we jump to October. On the 24th day of the month, in the 6th month, in the 2nd year of King Darius, in the 7th month, on the 21st day of the month, the word of the Lord came by the prophet Haggai, saying, speak now to Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest. This book would be so much shorter if we just used pronouns. I mean, I don't want to criticize, but, sometimes we don't have enough proper nouns. I think we might be going overboard with this book. Anyway, the high priest, to the remnant of the people, and say, who is left among you that saw this house in its former glory? How does it look to you now? Is it not in your sight as nothing? The question is, how would he know that? Now, maybe he knows that because he was around, or maybe he knows that because people talked about it. It's really hard to know. Verse 4. Yet now, take courage, O Zerubbabel, says the Lord. Take courage, O Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest. Take courage, all the people of the land, says the Lord. Work, for I am with you, says the Lord of hosts. I told you, you just keep on going. You're doing great. according to the promise that I made when you came out of Egypt. My spirit abides among you. Do not fear. For thus says the Lord of hosts, once again in a little while I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land. I will shake all the nations. So the treasure of all the nations shall come, and I will fill this house with splendor, says the Lord of hosts. The silver is mine, the gold is mine, says the Lord of hosts. The latter splendor of this house shall be greater than the former, says the Lord of hosts. And in this place I will give prosperity, or shalom. I will give peace in this time, says the Lord of hosts. So a little encouragement in the building there. Keep them moving. Help them get through this difficult time, promising they'll be with them. And this expectation, God shaking the earth. This is always a statement of God's power over the nations and God's control of all the world.
Steve asks.
Yes.
So some did live through the entire exile?
There is speculation of that, yes.
You want to repeat that question?
Dang it, I always forget to read, and I said it to myself, so I would. The question was, were there some people who lived through the entire exile? Some suggest they did, yes. I mean, that there apparently are those in Ezra when the Torah is read and see the building that remember the former glory. It's a long time. That's a really long time. But it's possible. I mean, what really brought and you know this as a historian, Steve, what really brought your average age down in the ancient world was the infant mortality. So when you saw an infant mortality could be huge. I mean, in some areas, 9 out of 10 children don't make it to their first birthday. But, and so that really brings your average age down. But if you can get past, 10, then you could live a fairly long life, provided you don't get an infection or wander into the Assyrians. So there is a chance, yes, that you could be, a grandfather and maybe live that long. There does seem to be the indication that there were some who lived a long time. But yeah, this is 66 years after the destruction, almost 70 years. So they would have had to have been very young. Tradition says Daniel was, but we don't know that for sure.
Beth Ward says, thank you for repeating the question.
Yes, I know. Try to encourage me. Try to use positive reinforcement. I just don't know if it's going to work. Anyway, we're going to see this eschatological expectation, this end of the world, end of time expectation coming up in a little bit. So, by the way, it's a short book, so maybe a short Bible study tonight. I don't know. We'll have to see. All right, we continue on. We've moved out to December. On the 24th day of the 9th month in the 2nd year of Darius, the word of the Lord came by the prophet Haggai, saying, Thus says the Lord of hosts, ask the priests for a ruling. If one carries consecrated meat in the folds of one's garment, and with the folds touches bread or stew or wine or oil or any kind of food, does it become holy? The priest answered, No. Then Haggai said, If one who is unclean by contact with a dead body touches any of these, does it become unclean? The priest answered, Yes, it becomes unclean. Haggai then said, So is it with this people and with this nation before me, says the Lord, and so with every work of their hands, what they offer there is unclean. But now consider what will come to pass from this day on before a stone was placed upon stone in the Lord's temple. Let me stop right here. So we have a question.
Bob Wallace.
Yes.
Does Haggai get any credit from Ezra or Nehemiah, or was he after them?
No, he is contemporary. Dang it. Bob Wallace asked if Haggai gets any credit with Ezra and Nehemiah, or was he after them? He is mentioned in the book of Ezra. And so he seems to inspire, the building takes place in Ezra. And so but Ezra doesn't show up on the scene until you get into the book. And so Haggai is mentioned in there, and he does get credit. Haggai and Zechariah, I think both are mentioned. It's interesting, though, because Haggai and Zechariah's prophetic messages the message is the same. The medium is totally different. Here, Haggai has this sort of traditional, thus says the Lord, why are y'all being so selfish? As opposed to Zechariah, which is apocalyptic. We're going to see that. Probably it'd be good to do it next week. Zechariah, much longer book and much weirder on the weird scale. I mean, it's truly apocalyptic. If you just look at the headings in the book of Zechariah, the angel in the lampstand, the person in the little basket. It looks like you're reading the headings from Revelation. It really does. So same time, same message, totally different method, which is fascinating. At least the first half of Zechariah comes from the same time. So Haggai asks a really easy true-false question to the priests. If I'm having consecrated meat and it comes into contact with things that are unclean, does the meat stay clean? No, it doesn't. Said, well, then if a dead body touches something that's clean, does the thing become? Yes, it does. I mean, these are the easiest multiple choice questions ever. And then he points out that so it is with this people. One of the things that happens in Ezra and Nehemiah, and really in the post-exile, we're going to see this reflect. We're going to see two different extremes reflected. We're going to see this extreme reflected on the one hand, where you need to be holy, you need to be separate, you need to make sure the people that are working on this thing are holy and separate and pure and following Torah and doing what they need to do. And then you have the book of Jonah, which is answering the other extreme of that. Ezra and Nehemiah both are extremely exclusivistic in their perspective. There was this fear following the exile that being open to other religions, being open to other people, exposed them to beliefs that ended up being syncretized and corrupting their faith and bringing about the exile. And so what you see in Ezra and Nehemiah are very strong exclusivistic tendencies that are sending away foreign women, divorcing foreign wives, trying to remain sort of pure and separate because those women brought along with them their foreign religion. And so in an effort of, for lack of a better term, quality control of the faith, rather than try to ensure sincere conversion, they simply sent them away, which is problematic for a number of reasons. And the text has been used a lot of unhealthy ways. And I don't really enjoy teaching the book of Ezra, but I probably should deal with that. But Haggai reflects that same attitude, that you have to be separate and pure and following Torah, or exile could happen again. And you don't want exile to happen again. So we're going to see the counter testimony to that come in Jonah. And there's other counter testimony to that in Ruth. Remember, I always quote James Sanders and say that the canon is self-correcting. The Bible is really good at keeping you from taking it too far out of context if you read all of it. And so we have Ezra and Nehemiah and Haggai, but we also have Jonah and Ruth and Esther, which is problematic in a different way. So all of those are post-exilic, written down in the post-exilic period, dealing with those problems that are facing the people at that time. And so that's what you see going on here in chapter 2. So how are we doing? We good? So far? Okay. So, but now, consider what will come to pass from this day on. Before a stone was placed upon a stone in the Lord's temple, how did you fare? When one came to a heap of 20 measures, there were but 10. When one came to a wine vat to draw 50 measures, there were but 20. I struck you all in the products of your toil with blight and mildew and hail, yet you did not return to me, says the Lord. Consider from this day on, from the 24th day of the 9th month, since the day the foundation of the Lord's temple was laid, consider, is there any seed left in the barn? Do the vine, the fig tree, the pomegranate, the olive tree still yield nothing? From this day on, I will bless you. So he's just reminding them of where they were. That, remember beforehand, when you weren't focused on me, bad things happened. Now you're focused on me, you're in good shape. You want to make sure and focus on me. So, tough message. We're good? You always have this thoughtful look on your face, so I don't know if you're reading or... Are you even on Facebook anymore? Or
No, I was waiting.
Checking your mail?
Seconds to see.
Oh, okay.
Because they're a little behind.
Right. Okay, now we get to I said Haggai had a couple of interesting, unique connections to the canon. We get to the other unique contribution that he makes. He says something really interesting about Zerubbabel. The word of the Lord came a second time. This is like more than a second time. Maybe it's the second time on the 24th of the month. Maybe that's the second time. Speak to Zerubbabel, governor of Judah, saying, I am about to shake the heavens and the earth, to overthrow the throne of kingdoms. I am about to destroy the strength of the kingdoms of the nations, overthrow the chariots and their riders. The horses, their riders shall fall, everyone by the sword of a comrade. On that day, says the Lord of hosts, I will take you, O Zerubbabel, my servant, son of Shealtiel, says the Lord, and make you like a signet ring, for I have chosen you, says the Lord of hosts. Wow. That's pretty impressive, really. I mean, Zerubbabel has been told that all the kingdoms of the earth are about to be destroyed and are going to submit to him, and that he is going to be God's signet ring, chosen. He's God's servant. These are big things God is saying. This is messianic language, God's anointed kind of language. Zerubbabel is God's servant, a signet ring, and God's chosen. That's pretty impressive. There's only one tiny little problem, I guess, really. Yeah, it didn't happen. That's an awkward moment, I think. Yeah, that's a little a little rough. This is very messianic, obviously. A lot of messianic terms, but Zerubbabel, Bubba, was always just a governor. He was never a king. You might surprise you to know the end of the world didn't happen at the end of the 6th century. So
Tyler asked and you just said,
yeah.
Zerubbabel is just the governor now, right?
Yeah, he's just the governor. And he only ever is just a governor there. I mean, commended for being obedient to God, but wow, that's strong language. I mean, that is really messianic.
So what did they do with that? At that time, what did that mean for them?
Well,
Repeat the question.
Cindy asked, what does that mean? What did they do with this text for that time? Well, I mean, how do you encounter a text that has something here that might seem a little awkward on some levels?
And didn't happen.
And didn't actually happen the way that one would expect to read it as happening. Yeah. Well, this is one of those things that probably safer pastors wouldn't talk about, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about it. There are a number of places in the prophets that the prophets struggle. How about that? Or how about this? We struggle to read the prophets. That's probably a better way to say it. We've seen a couple already. The prophets were obviously readers of their time and readers of the mind of God. And they seem to be a lot better at reading God's intention than God's plans. Because we've already seen Zerubbabel wasn't made king and the world didn't end. Ezekiel's temple was never built, which when we saw in Ezekiel, I told you it's never actually happened in history. Ezekiel's temple was never built. And Micah's child from Bethlehem, out of you, Bethlehem, one will come from whose origins are from ancient times in Micah chapter 5. The part we always cut out on our Christmas card says, because he's going to deliver us from the yoke of the Assyrians. We always leave that part off of the Christmas cards because it screws up a really nice December card. So we have to leave that part out. But Micah was, again, reading his time and his concern and his need. So what ends up happening is all of these fulfillments that didn't get fulfilled happen one of two ways. They either get pushed forward, like... actually, I say either push forward or allegorized. Usually they're both pushed forward and allegorized. Certainly in this case, they're definitely allegorized, where the Assyrians are standing as representations of all the enemies that Christ will deliver us from. And Zerubbabel is standing in line of David's line, which of course is in David's line, and Jesus is in the line of Zerubbabel. And so that's how that gets fulfilled, sort of long term in that regard. The one that the or is in there for when I made these notes, because I was thinking about them, is the temple in Ezekiel. And I didn't mention this when I was teaching Ezekiel, and that's on me. As I said, the temple of Ezekiel never existed in history. It was it's been read now as an eschatological expectation. This is the ideal relationship of God with his people is this new temple that is being built. But because Ezekiel talks about this temple, and because in the book of Revelation, there is no temple, God's dwelling place is directly with people, or I should argue that all creation is the temple. There in Revelation, there is no building like there is in Ezekiel. This is what leads some of those end time predictions to argue that the temple had to be rebuilt before Jesus could return. If you've ever heard that sentence, the temple has to be rebuilt before Jesus has to return, it is because they are looking for Ezekiel's temple in history as opposed to allegory. So for them, that prophecy has been pushed forward as opposed to allegorized. So, I mean, you and I grew up with those kinds of expectations and those kinds of readings. Yeah.
Bob Wallace has a question.
Okay, Bob Wallace has a question.
Is there any history about Bubba's background? where did he come from? Why was he appointed? Is he a Jew or a Persian?
He is Jewish. I'm sorry, dang it. I started and I repeated who had the question, but I didn't repeat the question. What do we know about Zerubbabel's background? Is he Jew or Persian? Where is he coming from? How did he get this position? We know that he is in the line of David. And so he is sometimes called prince, but he is a local governor. Not prince as in prince, but different prince.
Dang.
Yeah, although it is very close to the anniversary of Prince's passing, and we all had a moment of silence reflection, I think, as we listened to Purple Rain. But no, Zerubbabel is prince, God's signet ring, in the line of David. Sheshbazzar, which is another great name, by the way, was the governor immediately prior to Zerubbabel, who led them out, and then Zerubbabel, and Sheshbazzar actually built the altar. It's Zerubbabel who came in and built the temple. We don't know a whole lot about him beyond that. His royal lineage, his eventual lineage to David, and the fact that he is governor of the area. Yeah, good question.
Steve asks,
Mhm.
is Ezekiel's temple then a metaphor for Israel? And don't forget to repeat the question.
Is Ezekiel's temple a metaphor for Israel? And don't forget to repeat the question. I think Ezekiel's temple is a metaphor for the relationship in the eschaton, the end of times. Temples are always where heaven meets earth. They are this joining point between heaven and earth. Genesis 1, the creation narrative, is discussed as the building of a temple. The last thing you do in the building of a temple is to place an image of the God in the temple, which is why Genesis 1, the last thing that occurs is the image of God is placed in creation. All of creation is seen as a temple, a place where heaven meets earth, if you will, and God can dwell with humanity, which of course gets corrupted. So temples are always representative of that place where heaven meets earth. So I think the temple in Ezekiel is Ezekiel's way of talking about this ideal time, this ideal relationship when God dwells with God's people in the perfect temple. In Revelation, that temple takes on a more Genesis 1 picture, because the New Jerusalem is exactly the same shape as the Holy of Holies. The city has the same shape as the Holy of Holies. So there's no temple in the city because the city itself is the Holy of Holies, and the rest of creation is the temple. So that in Revelation, the goal of humanity is to abide with God perfectly in the Holy of Holies, which was the goal at the beginning of creation. And so that all of creation then becomes the temple at the end of this story. So I think the way that John sees the end of time as city and cosmic temple, Ezekiel is seeing it as local temple in the way in which he is portraying it. I should say, though, Ezekiel's temple is cubic and square, which very much has the dimensions of the Holy of Holies as well, which makes me wonder if Ezekiel's not playing on that this temple is the Holy of Holies too. I don't know. I mean, that's multi-leveled. I'm not an Ezekiel scholar, but I think there's got to be something there in the way that was constructed. So. We good? Any others come in while I was riffing on that?
Not yet.
Okay. There are several places where you get these sort of, I will call them prophetic challenges. Ezekiel saw the fall of the king of Tyre, and these three are the big ones, obviously. But as I say, you just sort of allegorize them and push them forward and just say that, well, we didn't read them right at the time. And again, there's every chance we aren't reading them the way the prophet meant them. We're being overly literal. It's very, we could be reading, we read that Zerubbabel prediction as well. How about that? It didn't happen. And it's not hard for me to think that Haggai might have went, no, that's not what I meant by that. So, I don't think I have the arrogance to believe I've got the right reading down all the time. So, I'm arrogant, but I just don't know that I'm that arrogant. So, right? I'm honest. So how are we? That's it. That's the prophet Haggai. For me, he is, on one level, an example of hope. And I like to talk about Haggai on one level, and he bothers me on another. Because Haggai is the prophet that shows us it didn't have to be that way. He's the prophet that shows us if people listen and do what the prophet says, things get better. And God stands by their side and encourages them and helps them as they go through. So that to me is encouraging. Look, it's possible, and also terrifying. Look, what would be possible? I mean, we really do have the capacity to listen and choose to do what we need to do, and we don't. And that's tragic. It reminds me very much, and I may have some friends from Lawndale watching tonight, and the Lawndale miracle that they talk about, the transformation of that west side suburb of Chicago, that the way in which Coach and all the rest of you redeem that area and provide healthcare and hope and after school programs and drug rehab and a place where it doesn't have to be that way. You know, the problems that face a lot of inner cities, you guys prove that it doesn't have to be that way. And so on the one hand, it is so encouraging and so challenging. And I always love to be next to you guys because, you know, when the Spirit of God is pouring down, it's nice to be near enough to get splashed, but at least with a little bit of the drops. But on the other hand, it's convicting because it doesn't have to be that way. You know, when we look at all of our places. So Haggai is both encouraging and convicting for me in that way. That's what he brings. Before Bob asks, what does this bring to us? That's what he brings to me in many ways. Any other questions? We're good? All right. I told you, short book, short study tonight. Next week's not going to be a short study. Next week is Zechariah. That's going to go a little bit longer and probably going to go over 2 weeks because you might remember when we talked about Isaiah, we talked about 1st Isaiah and 2nd Isaiah and maybe even 3rd Isaiah. Zechariah has exactly those same issues. There is 1st Zechariah and 2nd Zechariah. They're two distinct parts of the book. No one really ever talks about that because nobody cares because the good Jesus stuff isn't problematic for folks in Zechariah, so I guess. So we'll talk about that next week.
Beth Ward said, bring snacks.
Bring snacks for next. That's right. Bring snacks next week. So you have time. I've got my Fresca, so I'm ready to go for next week. But we will continue the study on. Thanks so much for tuning in with us and for asking your questions and reminding me to ask the questions. And hopefully I can get better at that. Now I've been doing this for 1.5 years, and tonight I did better. So I think by 3 years I should be fine, I think. Oh, and special thanks. Some of you may have noticed, special thanks to my barber, my COVID barber, during this time, as Cindy is the one who has sheared me. And she did a nice job. I'm very pleased with this.
She knows how fractions work.
She knows how fractions work better than earlier in our marriage. And so the difference between 1/2 and 5/8 and all the rest. So that's right. Not only is she an accomplished chaplain and a doctor and an ordained minister and quite a singer, she also works as a barber as well. So I'm blessed beyond measure, doubly blessed. So.